The billionaire hadn't spoken in days, but everyone heard the crash when his empire fell. Behind locked doors and cold marble floors, a secret waited in silence. Until the cleaning lady found it. One simple act. One buried truth. And everything changed. You won't believe who she really is. The penthouse didn't sound like a home anymore. It was too quiet. No music. No voices. Just the faint hum of city life far below. Muffled by triple glazed glass and thick designer walls. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It presses in, like it knows something you don't. Julian Crane sat motionless on the edge of his leather sofa, his tailored shirt wrinkled, one cuff unbuttoned. His phone buzzed again. He didn't look. He already knew. Another journalist. Another lawyer. Another reminder that the empire he built with cold precision was now cracking apart beneath his feet. A wine glass, still half full, trembled slightly on the marble coffee table, maybe from the subway rumbling underneath. Or maybe just the tremor in his hand when he set it down hours ago. Then came a soft sound, the beep of the private elevator unlocking. The penthouse door opened. Julian didn't move. He didn't have to. It was just the cleaning lady. "Good afternoon, Mr. Crane," came a warm, familiar voice. It was Dolly, Dolores Martinez. She always used the full Mr., even when no one else did. Always polite, never pushy. She walked in with a slow, steady rhythm, rubber soles squeaking lightly on the pristine floor, pushing her supply cart that rattled with bottles and brushes. Julian didn't answer. Dolly paused at the edge of the living room, giving him a soft glance. She saw it again, the same unshaven face, the same hollow stare. The apartment hadn't changed since Tuesday. Same untouched breakfast on the sideboard. Same glass on the table. "You want me to skip the bedroom today?" she asked gently. Still no reply. "All right," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I'll start with the kitchen." Julian rubbed his temples and sank further into the couch. Dolly moved through the space like someone who knew how not to disturb the broken pieces of a man. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. She just noticed. The way the framed picture of his parents had been turned face down. The way all the curtains were drawn, even with the city skyline glittering beyond them. She wiped down the counters, straightened a chair, then carefully lifted the same newspaper that had been there 3 days in a row. Its headline still screamed, "Crane Corp in crisis. Billionaire silence raises questions." She hesitated, then smoothed the page out as if giving it some dignity. Julian spoke. Finally, "You ever lose everything in a week?" Dolly stopped, but didn't look at him right away. She finished wiping a countertop before answering. "I lost my first apartment in 4 days," she said softly. "Right after my husband passed. Flood took everything. They said it was an act of God." Julian blinked slowly, processing. "You bounced back?" he asked almost mockingly. "No," she replied, picking up a broken mug he hadn't noticed. "You get through it. Not always the same, but you get through." For the first time in days, Julian looked up, really looked at her. She didn't flinch under his stare. Dolly gave him a small, warm nod and moved to the sink, humming faintly under her breath. Something old, Spanish, melancholy but comforting. Julian turned back to the city skyline. His eyes weren't so blank now. The silence wasn't gone, but it felt different, alive. The next day, the sun rose behind thick clouds. Not that it mattered. The penthouse stayed dim, shades still drawn, lights still off. But Dolly returned, just like always. On time, in uniform, her soft black curls tucked under a plain blue head wrap. She pressed the elevator button, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the silent world above. Julian was standing this time, barefoot, at the window, watching the city but not really seeing it. He didn't turn as she entered, just said quietly, "Didn't think you'd come back." "I always do," Dolly replied, "unless they fire me." He gave a hollow laugh, more air than sound. She pushed her cart in gently, then stopped a few feet behind him. "Want me to leave today?" she asked. He paused, then shook his head. "No, just do your thing." So she did. But doing her thing wasn't just cleaning. Dolly had been in this building almost 15 years. She'd seen marriages rise and fall in glass towers, watched fortunes balloon and burst, Some people only noticed dirt. Dolly noticed pain, where it settled, how it clung to the corners people tried to scrub clean. As she picked up discarded clothes from the floor, she caught sight of Julian's laptop on the counter. Its screen was cracked, coffee stain across the keyboard. She didn't comment, but she remembered the news that morning. Another stock drop, Crane Corp spiraling into a class action lawsuit. She didn't need to read the fine print to know what that kind of pressure did to a man. When she made her way toward the kitchen, Julian finally turned. "You ever wonder if you deserve better than this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward her mop, her cart, her badge. Dolly didn't answer right away. She sprayed the counter, wiped it down, rinsed the cloth. Then, calmly, "I used to, when I was younger. Wanted a house with a yard, my own bakery, but life had other plans." He frowned. "And that doesn't eat at you?" She gave a small shrug. "It did. Now, I just try to do good where I can. That's enough." Julian really watched her for the second time in 2 days. He looked at her hands, calloused, steady, kind. "You always been this calm?" Dolly chuckled. "I used to throw frying pans when I was mad. Ask my sisters." Julian smiled, a real one, if only for a second. The room felt warmer. Not by much, but enough to notice. She didn't stay long after that. Just tidied the books, folded a sweater draped across the armchair, and gave him a gentle, "See you tomorrow, Mr. Crane." This time he replied, "Yeah, tomorrow." As the elevator doors closed behind her, Julian stood in the stillness. Same silence, same shadows, but somehow it didn't feel quite as empty. Maybe, for the first time in a long while, someone saw him. 3 days passed. Julian hadn't left the penthouse. Not for meetings, not for press. His team kept calling. He let them. The messages built up in his inbox like snowdrifts, cold, growing, silent. His reflection in the hallway mirror startled him now. Eyes sunken, jaw unshaven, the kind of look money couldn't hide. And still, every afternoon like clockwork, the elevator chimed. Dolly came in, her cart in hand, with that quiet grace that didn't demand space but always filled it. Today, she brought him soup. It wasn't fancy, just lentil, homemade, in a beat-up thermos. "I made too much," she said casually, setting it down. "Be ashamed to waste it." He stared at it, didn't speak. "I didn't poison it, if that's what you're thinking," she added, smirking. Julian gave a dry laugh and finally nodded. "Thanks." He didn't touch it right away, but he didn't throw it out either. That was something. As Dolly moved through the apartment, she began to see more clearly. This wasn't just a man hiding from scandal. This was someone sinking. The expensive suits hung untouched in the hallway. A printed agenda lay crumpled on the floor. The fireplace hadn't been lit in weeks. And in the office, half hidden under folders and old press packets, was a photograph, face down again. She paused, picked it up. Julian and 3 others, younger, brighter, celebrating what looked like the launch of Crane Corp. And in the background, blurred by the frame, was a face she recognized. Her own. It was old, yes, but she remembered the event. The catering staff had been pulled from a temp agency. She'd filled in that night, barely scraping by after losing her bakery lease. She had served drinks, smiled politely, stood in the shadows while they toasted their millions. Now here he was, unraveled, hollowed, and here she was again, mopping his floors. Something flickered in her chest, not quite bitterness, not quite pity, something deeper, complicated. Back in the living room, Julian sat cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through headlines on his cracked phone. Crane Corp to be investigated for internal fraud. Anonymous board member, Julian's in free fall. Once a genius, now just a ghost. He looked up, suddenly aware of Dolly standing nearby, holding the soup. "Feel like everyone wants a piece of me," he muttered. "Even now. Especially now." Dolly set the thermos down beside him, then looked at him, not as a billionaire, not as a boss. Just a man. "Maybe they do," she said softly. "But maybe someone should just sit with you instead." For a second, neither of them moved. Then Julian nodded, barely. A quiet kind of surrender. He picked up the thermos, opened it. The scent of garlic, cumin, and memory filled the air. He took a spoonful. Warm, familiar, real, and maybe for the first time in weeks needed. The next day, the curtains were open. Dolly stepped into the penthouse and immediately noticed the change. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor like it had been waiting weeks to be let in. It hit the marble counters, the edges of the glass railing, even caught in the dust on the windows. Julian stood near the balcony, arms crossed, face turned toward the sky. "Morning," he said without turning. Dolly smiled. "That was new." "Morning, Mr. Crane." He glanced back at her. "Julian's fine." That was very new. Dolly started her routine, but something in her moved slower today. Not from tiredness, but from curiosity. Care. Hope even. The kind that comes when someone starts lifting their own weight again, even if just barely. "I read the article," he said suddenly. She paused, glancing over. "Which one?" He held up his phone. "The one from Forbes. Said I build my company on arrogance disguised as genius." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "Can't say they're wrong." Dolly looked at him gently. "Sometimes you don't know what you're building till it's finished." Julian blinked. That wasn't pity in her voice, it was truth. He moved toward the kitchen and picked up a plate from the drying rack. Washed. Dry. He had cleaned something. "I made coffee," he offered, awkward. "It's not good, but there's enough for two." Dolly raised an eyebrow, amused. "Is that your way of saying thank you for the soup?" He shrugged. "Kind of." They sat at the kitchen island, 2 mugs between them, his chipped, hers spotless. For a while, they just drank in silence. Then Julian looked up. "Why are you still here?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, why keep showing up? You don't owe me anything." Dolly held his gaze. "I've cleaned up after a lot of people. Most of them are just messy. You're hurting. And I've been around enough pain to know when someone needs another human being nearby." Julian stared down into his coffee. Something heavy stirred in his chest, but it wasn't despair this time. It was shame. And beneath that, something even harder to admit, relief. No one from his board had called with kindness. No friend had visited. No assistant had even offered a word beyond logistics. But this woman, who once stood silently in the background of his success, was now in the center of his ruin. Not for gossip, not for gain, just to be there. Later, as Dolly packed up her cart to leave, Julian followed her to the door. "I'm thinking about calling my sister," he said. "It's been a while." Dolly nodded, offering a soft smile. She'd probably like that. Before she left, she paused and turned back. "You look a little more alive today." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's the coffee." "No," she said, wheeling the cart into the elevator. "It's the choice." The doors closed. Julian stood alone again. But the silence had changed. Now it had possibility. Rain hit the penthouse windows like it had something to say. Outside, the city blurred in silver streaks. Inside, Julian stood in front of the fireplace, holding an old photo. Same one Dolly had seen before. Him and his co-founders, arms slung over shoulders, champagne in the air. Frozen in celebration. He hadn't been able to look at it before. Now he couldn't stop. There was so much he had ignored back then. People, feelings, fairness. The grind had come first. Always. Dolly arrived late that day. No explanation. She just gave a small nod when he opened the door himself. "You okay?" he asked gently. She looked surprised. He'd never asked that before. "I'm all right," she said, placing her bag on the cart. "Just heavy day." Julian didn't press, but something about the way she moved told him it wasn't just the weather weighing on her. They worked side by side again. No fanfare. No need for words. Then, just as she was wiping down the glass shelves, Julian spoke up, voice tighter than usual. "They want me to go on camera next week. Address the damage," they said. "Try to save face." He sighed. "I don't know what I'm saving anymore. My image? My name." Dolly turned, leaning on her cleaning cloth. "You'll say what you mean." "I'm not sure I know what that is." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Don't lie. Don't spin. Just tell the truth. That's enough." Julian looked at her. "Truth's complicated." She nodded. "So's healing." He sat down, the weight of her words settling in his chest. Then something cracked, not in his voice, but in his face. That tightly held jaw softened. The false confidence slipped. His hands trembled just slightly as he pressed his palms together. "Dolly," he said quietly, "I hurt people. I made decisions that pushed good folks out, destroyed livelihoods. I told myself it was growth." Her eyes didn't leave him. "My son," she said slowly, "once worked for a startup. Poured everything into it. Worked nights, skipped meals. They cut him during a restructure. No warning. No payout." Julian swallowed. He didn't breathe. "He never recovered," she continued. "Started drinking. Said he wasn't worth anything anymore. One day, he just didn't wake up." The words landed like thunder in a quiet room. Julian's lips parted, but nothing came out. "I'm not saying it was you," she said softly, "but it was men like you. And choices like yours. Silence. Not the kind they used to sit in. This was deeper. Heavier. Human." She turned back to the glass shelf. "I hated people like you for a long time. Still do, sometimes. But I don't want to carry that hate anymore." Julian stood, slowly. He walked to her, unsure, fragile. "I'm so sorry," he said, and for once, it wasn't polished or performative. It came from somewhere raw. Dolly didn't nod, didn't wave it away. She let the words hang, real and rough. That moment, the shared pain, the truth spoken without armor, wasn't pretty. It wasn't neat, but it was real. And it was the beginning of something neither of them had ever expected: understanding. The next morning, the penthouse was empty. Dolly stood in the doorway, waiting. No sign of Julian. No sound. The curtains were drawn again, lights off, coffee pot cold. Something was off. She walked in quietly, her cart rolling softer than usual. On the counter, last night's dishes sat untouched. One plate, one fork, half-eaten meal. She called out gently, "Julian?" No answer. Her chest tightened just a little. It wasn't like him, not anymore. She moved through the apartment carefully, every step uncertain. The door to his bedroom was open, bed unmade. A jacket missing from the hook. His phone left face down on the table beside a notepad, scribbled with crossed-out sentences and fragments of what looked like a speech. She spotted a glass by the sink, dry inside. Not recent. That's when she saw it. A folded piece of paper on the edge of the dining table, her name written across it in sharp, shaky handwriting, Dolly. Hands trembling just slightly, she opened it. "You were the only one who stayed. I don't know if I deserve that, but I needed it. And maybe that's enough. You once said healing is complicated. You were right. I'm leaving for a while. Not to run. To figure out what I want to build next. Maybe this time, it won't break anyone. Thank you for the soup. And the truth." There was no signature. Just a paperweight beside it, holding it still. Dolly stood there for a long time. She didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just let the note sit in her hands, the weight of it deeper than ink. Eventually, she moved. She didn't clean this time. Instead, she pulled a sheet of her own from her bag, wrote something down, and folded it neatly. She placed her note where his had been. "You're not the worst thing you've done. Start again." Then she quietly walked out of the apartment. No fanfare, no dramatic music. Just the sound of an elevator closing behind a woman who had chosen something harder than hate, mercy. And that one simple act, it would follow Julian Crane to places he never imagined. Not because it erased the past, but because it reminded him he still had a future. He hadn't done that yet. But the message Dolly left, "You're not the worst thing you've done," kept ringing louder than his shame. So maybe today, downstairs, Dolly Martinez sat in her own apartment, sipping tea. The news played softly on her tiny TV. Crane Corp appoints interim CEO. Former founder steps away for personal reflection. She didn't flinch at the name anymore. Her fingers gently traced the edge of a worn envelope, Julian's note. She hadn't thrown it away, not out of sentiment, but because it meant something. Forgiveness had taken a piece of her pain and turned it into purpose. Not for him, for her. In a small wooden box beside her tea, she placed his letter next to another one her son had written her years ago. 2 voices, one lost, one maybe just beginning to find its way. Back upstairs, Julian opened his laptop. Not for stocks, not for speeches. He typed slowly, hesitantly, a letter to Ava, to his co-founders, and finally one to Dolly. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't, for feeding me when I starved for something real, and for reminding me I was still human. He didn't know what came next, didn't need to. What mattered now wasn't rebuilding his empire. It was rebuilding himself. And all because someone with worn shoes and a gentle voice had walked in, seen the mess, and didn't look away. Because sometimes it isn't power, wealth, or brilliance that saves a life. It's kindness, quiet, simple, true.